Going to just ask if everyone can see my screen okay. Good, good. And truly, we've got a small group here, probably one of the smallest I've had the opportunity to work with yet. So it's a great time to ask questions because this is sort of a very condensed version of probably 3 days worth of meetings and trainings. So I tried to just give you some highlights and lowlights, if you will, of what's been going on in everyone's world. So I really do welcome the opportunity to have you just jump in, ask questions. Let's make it interactive. There's only, I think, 14 of us, so please make this your time. It's important that I can help serve and meet your needs. So I'm truly doing an update today on what's been happening in our HR world. Tell you a little bit, thank you for everything you said about me, Nancy, just a little bit about the Human Resource Consulting Group. The HRCG is 32 years old. We're a women-owned business. We provide services both in the HR realm as well as the payroll realm for our clients, both nonprofit, profit, municipalities, clients from California to Maine. Our goal is to provide a high level of service to those clients. We don't have voicemail. Many people think that we're crazy, but we don't. Voicemail goes on after 8 p.m. at night until 8:30 in the morning. So our goal is to provide that high touch level of service, which has been really challenging in the last 6 to 8 months. As many of you know, if you have your toe in the HR world, our world has been somewhat torpedoed by many fronts, both at a federal level as well as a state level. So we're going to talk through some of those things that some of you may have a great resonant knowledge in. Some of you may just be interested in some of the updates. So where you want me to move forward, if you have a good base of knowledge, just push me along. I'd be happy to move on to topics that are of greater interest. But the goal today is to talk about what's affected our world since March 27, when President Trump signed in the Families First CARES Act, and we certainly began living with the emergency sick leave, emergency family medical leave. We have all of the tax credits around that, all of this stuff around unemployment insurance, now the new unemployment insurance stabilization piece, PPP, which many of you have gotten your fingers into, I'm sure, and a variety of other executive orders which have affected us. And then, of course, we have what's happening locally, specifically Connecticut. The travel advisory has impacted many businesses. We want to talk a little bit about the shared work, if that interests you, and I put that last because I just want to make sure we have time for everything else. And then I thought I would spend a little bit of time around sexual harassment requirements, as well as the paid family medical leave, which starts the first of the year. Know that we could probably spend the entire day on paid FMLA. So my goal today is to really just give you a very high level of what's happening and make sure you know that you need to get some additional information if you haven't done that so far. So I want to just spend a few minutes on PPP. If I could, I can't see everybody's hands at one time, but just yell out, how many of you have had to get involved in the PPP for yourself or your organizations? Okay, so some of you, I can't see all faces, so I can't see all fingers, but thank you for those of you who did. So again, I'm going to just spend a few minutes on high level and give you some updates on PPP. So as many of you know, the PPP program was created to help businesses that didn't have the levels of business that we had previously in 2019. So some of the bigger changes that took over for PPP originally, we were given an 8-week period to spend the PPP loans. That was changed in July, where they've now given us 8 to 24 weeks. Those are 2 different periods or covered periods. They also reduced the amount that could be contributed toward payroll, so we can spend less on payroll and more on other expenses if that helps us. They also very much clarified wage or salary reductions can't be more than 25% during the covered period. But they also identified some safe harbors for us, which are really important. And they also clarified the FTE. They were waiting for some additional clarifications around FTE count, what the covered period means, as well as those exemptions. So we've gotten some clarification. We were looking for some additional clarification in the heels for the HEROES Act that was supposed to actually have been launched first in August. Then they committed to having it to us right around Labor Day. And here we are, the 8th of October. I don't know that I'm confident we will have something prior to the election. I truly thought we would, but not sure that that's the case anymore. So as most of you, I'm sure, know that in addition to payroll, that other 40% can be spent on rent or mortgage or utility payments. They all have to be in play prior to February 15th of 2020 to be covered. So some important clarifications that were made, and this is current as of about 3 weeks ago, but nothing has really changed since that point. The law really changed or clarified the issue around incurred. They've given us 3 different models to look at for payroll. So for those of you who do get involved in payroll on the HR side, it's important for you to know that you can now choose either a period that's incurred or paid during your covered or alternative pay period. So payroll costs that are either incurred or paid during your covered or alternative period. What's an alternative period? It's a period that you pick so that you can make sure that you get 8 weeks of payroll or 24 weeks of payroll. Some people were very concerned because your clock started ticking the day you received your PPP funds. And if you just did a payroll the day before, you were like, oh my gosh, I've got a semi-monthly payroll. I'm never going to get all 8 weeks worth of payroll in there. So those changes were made to make sure that you could get 8 weeks of payroll. So you can do that by either looking at the covered period of what's incurred or paid. You can look at what's been incurred before the covered period, but paid during your covered or alternative period, or what was incurred during, but paid on or before the next payroll date. All of that really means, to just summarize that, is you get a full 8 weeks of payroll or a full 24 weeks of payroll, whichever you need. It's either 8 or 24, so be clear on that. But while trying to clarify, it looks a little convoluted, but at the end of the day, it was a great clarification for us. Just quickly, so that you all know, for those of you that are part of small businesses, you will have 60 days for the lender to review your submission once you do put in your application for forgiveness. SBA has 90 days to review that. So there's 150 days that it could take. We're in a bit of a weak position given the fact that it's October 8th. There are still things that we're waiting for on the forgiveness front. Many businesses don't work on a calendar year end. Some have professional services organizations, as an example, that have partners, may have a November 30th deadline for their year end. They have monies that they need to give out to their partners. They don't know if the expenses that we use towards the PPP loan are actually going to be able to be written off as expenses. So we're in a quagmire here. We've already hit the fact that we're probably not going to have clarity for the tax year of 2020, no matter what happens, if it takes 150 days to approve these loans. But that's sort of where we are. And again, please jump in with questions if you have questions. It's as clear as mud.
Robin, I've got a question.
Sure.
And I know you're going to talk a little bit about this later. If a company does the PPP, are they eligible or not eligible for the shared work program? Can they do those together?
They can do those together. Many companies have, and I'd certainly encourage you to do that. You need to be careful with the reduction of 25% of someone's pay, right? So you need to manage that carefully with your business needs, but you absolutely can do the shared work program concurrently. And we will do a really high level of the shared work program if that's helpful, but many people were able to stretch their PPP monies by doing just that. So I would encourage you to look at that as an option. So again, I'm not going to get too technical with you on the forgiveness side of PPP. I've been fortunate that as I'm the chair of our industry association, we've been working with the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, as well as the ABA, the American Bankers Association, and SBA, and those four groups together have identified what will be considered standard for providing payroll or proof of payment. So there are four things that need to get made or produced, if you will, with your forgiveness applications. There's a long form, 3508, and a short form, 3508EZ. But know that these four pieces of data will be consistent for all of those. So payroll proof of payment, the association that I was just talking about with you has come up with a certified report that SBA will take to certify, in fact, your payroll dollars. So for those of you, again, who are involved in any of the PPP processes, talk to your payroll providers about that certified report. We do have just about everything finalized. Again, we're still waiting for some final comments on any changes from both Treasury as well as the House and Senate on some of these new acts, but the report itself has been identified. Your payroll provider can also provide you with the tax forms that you need for any of the 941s or 940s, your quarterly tax returns that will be needed as well. Did I skip anyone? For your non-payroll, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but basically we talked about your interest payments or lease payments, utility payments, but everything needs to be have been in effect prior to February of 2020. So I just want to spend a second on the EASY form if you don't know that it's out there for those of you who are either self-employed or independent contractors, sole props. This is a great option for you. It also is a great opportunity for businesses who did not reduce anyone's salaries by more than 25%, because if you did not reduce anyone's salary by more than 25% and you've maintained your head count, you will be able to use this EASY application. You'll also be able to use it if you didn't reduce anyone by more than 25%, but you were unable to operate during the COVID period, if you will, because of restrictions by either the CDC, OSHA, or HHS. So take a look at that application. It is much simpler than the rest. A question that's come up quite a bit around when you can submit your application. You can submit it whenever you'd like for your covered period. So yes, you can submit it prior to the end of your covered period if you don't need the entire covered period. And just a quick review, lenders can make the decision that you're either approved in full, part, you can be denied, or denied without prejudice, meaning they need more time to look at or more data to review your application. So any questions before I go on PPP, or more importantly, the forgiveness? So just a quick look to the future, what we have seen both in the HEALS Act as well as the HEROES Act that are under review right now, or under contentious debate, I guess. They're hoping to do another round of PPP for organizations specifically that have less sales, a certain sales target they're looking at, or revenue target, or nonprofits that have lower income amounts, if you will, for 19 over 2020. They're also looking at targeting markets like hospitality, retail industries that have been very negatively impacted. So we're expecting that will be another tranche, if you will, for PPP. We just don't know quite what that's going to look like. We're also looking for the final blessing on expenses, which is a big deal especially as we come up toward year end. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes on emergency paid sick leave. This really went into effect back at the beginning of COVID under the CARES Act. Many of you probably are aware of this already, but I'm going to just recap it for you. Employers with less than 500 employees will have the option to provide emergency paid sick leave that is reimbursed to you dollar for dollar. We'll talk about how in a moment, but for full-time employees, up to 80 hours of paid sick leave. For part-time employees, the equivalent that they would work for 2 hours based on their prior 6 months of average number of hours worked. If they're new, what they were hired to work. There are some exemptions. We're going to talk about those together with the emergency family medical leave. But basically, it's an opportunity for you to pay employees who are unable to work or telework because they're either taking care of themselves, which is here in red, or taking care of others, which is in blue. So if they're taking care of themselves because they've been subject to a state, federal, or local quarantine related to COVID, if they're taking care of themselves because of health concerns that a health provider might have due to COVID, someone's in cancer treatment, someone has an autoimmune issue, and the health provider says stay out, and there is no telework for them to do, or if they're experiencing symptoms and seeking a medical diagnosis for COVID, those three scenarios where they're taking care of self, they are subject to or offered emergency paid sick leave. We qualify the difference between taking care of self and taking care of others, as you'll see in a moment, because people are paid differently depending on whether they're taking care of self or others. So we'll review that in a moment. But taking care of others, if you're responsible or caring for an individual who's subject to an order of self-quarantine, as we've just talked about, an employee is caring for a son or daughter because the child care or school is closed because of COVID, or the employee is experiencing anything that's similar to anything we've talked about through the HHS, the Health and Human Services Organization. It's sort of this catch-all bucket to give everyone an opportunity to provide people who may be taking care of others who are sick due to the pandemic. So taking care of self, you're actually paid at a cap up to $511 per day. So if you make $300 a day, you'll get $300. If you make $700, you'll get $511. So whichever that is, the cap is $511 per day. If you are taking care of others, you're capped at $200 a day at 2/3 your regular rate. So it's, if you make $200 a day, it's 2/3 of your $200 a day that you'll be paid for taking care of others. Some general rules, and this specifically I wanted to talk about, while the sick leave program does not carry over, we are expecting that there will be some kind of an extension from 2021, or 2020 rather, into 2021. Nothing has been formally approved yet, but don't be surprised if you see that. I would also expect that if we do see it, there may be a replenishment of the banks. Right now, this is a one-time 10 days, and once that 10 days is used, it's used. But we are expecting to see this prolonged into 2021. So while it doesn't continue right now, keep an eye out for that. Employers can't require that employees find replacements or covers for their scheduled hours. They may, employees may use their own paid sick time if they choose to, rather than using emergency paid sick leave, and you cannot, as an employer, require them to use any other kind of leave before they use this sick leave. There are poster requirements. If you don't have your poster up yet, you want to make sure you do that. And you can also, and if you need the poster, let me know. I'd be happy to get it to you. Employees may also be required to follow your regular notice periods that you have for providing sick time. So before I leave emergency sick, any questions specifically about emergency sick. I'm going to talk about how you get your money back in a little bit when we talk about emergency FMLA. Questions? I don't see the chat box, so if you do, Nancy, just yell. All right. Emergency FMLA, same, under 500 lives, expands the FMLA on a temporary basis. While emergency sick could be somebody who's working for you for 1 day, they're eligible to take it. Emergency family medical, they must have worked for you for 30 days, but there's no requirement of hours for those of you who have or used to, if you will, family medical leave from a federal or from a state level. Basically, EFMLA provides up to 12 weeks of job protected leave, and employees can be paid under the paid sick leave for the first 10 days of this leave. So what's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is for employees who are unable to work or telework because they have to care for their sons or daughters that are under the age of 18 because the school has been closed or because daycare has been closed due to the public health emergency. The definition for a son or a daughter is also in loco as FMLA defines it, meaning a child that is like a child to you. So FMLA definition applies. And it also says that the public health emergency is defined as COVID defines as declared by the federal, state, or local authority. So this has become a bigger deal most recently with some of the travel bans that have been put in for both the emergency sick as well as EFMLA. So how does it work? The first 10 days are unpaid, but if they haven't used their emergency sick, they can use their emergency sick for the first 10 days. They can opt to use any accrued paid time if they have it, but you cannot require as an employer them to use any paid time for this EFMLA. So again, it's similar to taking care of others, 2/3 of the regular pay rate, capped at $200 per day for an aggregate of $10,000 per employee. That's for 2020. Part-timers, same as with emergency sick, what their average number of hours are prior 6 months, or what they would have been scheduled for if there are newer employees. Bargaining units can opt in. So some changes that we have just recently seen, and this happened in the Southern District of New York just recently, 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact. There were lots of questions that had been outstanding with EFMLA. So these are some of the things that have come out of that. Most importantly, this issue around intermittent leave. Can family medical leave be taken on an intermittent basis as family medical leave affords? And the answer is yes, but with your approval as an employer. Many employers have been doing this already. This just clarified the fact that it's up to the employer to allow intermittent leave of the EFMLA portion, not just the employee. So if you want to allow someone to have 4 hours a week of EFMLA, you can do that. But again, that's up to you. I would just make sure you apply that consistently. Other developments, they also defined who a healthcare provider is, and they adopted the Family and Medical Leave Act definition of who a healthcare provider is. That's the person who can certify a leave. As well, they clarified that employees must provide employers with documentation as soon as possible to support the family, either the emergency sick or the emergency family medical leave. Also just wanted to point out that it did reaffirm, as we believe, the employer's approval or ability to approve that leave. It also identified that when an employee needs to take leave because of a hybrid learning schedule, every town and county, as you all know, are different. It said that employer consent is not required because the leave is not considered intermittent. That's an important piece. So I'm going to read that again. If the school has a hybrid learning schedule, employer consent is not required for an intermittent leave because the leave is not considered intermittent, meaning that because there is school available, EFMLA would not apply in this particular case. And again, there was some craziness going on about whether someone who had no work at all and was on furlough, if they would be eligible for either emergency sick or emergency family medical leave. And basically the court said no, they have to have work available to them to be eligible to take either leave. And just to confirm what the exceptions are for emergency sick and emergency family medical leave, healthcare providers may be exempted from this, but there's not a unilateral exemption. Just because you're a nurse working at a hospital doesn't mean that all nurses at that hospital are going to be exempted. And I caution people to judiciously use the exemption when you're identifying who would be unable to either be paid under emergency sick or emergency family medical. Businesses with less than 50 people may also exempt themselves, but again, the burden of proof is to show that it would jeopardize the viability of the ongoing business concern. So you want to make sure that you are using that judiciously. And again, you'll be getting all of those dollars back. So just one note for those of you who are real small employers with 25 or less should know that there is a traditional job reinstatement provision under EFMLA. Employers with 25 or more must use the same standard as FMLA, which is same job, same pay, same responsibilities when they're back. If you have less than 25 employees, if the position doesn't exist anymore because of the pandemic, you have to make a reasonable effort to get that person back into a similar or equivalent position with equivalent pay and benefits. If you cannot, then you need to make a reasonable effort to restore that person in the 1-year period that follows. So we're going to spend a minute on tax credits. As I shared, these emergency sick, emergency family medical leave are both eligible for tax credits to repay you dollar for dollar what you spent. Most of you can do that through payroll. You should have a special code that you can qualify these wages that are being paid for. You will get back that money through a credit on your Social Security taxes. So if you owe, your payroll is $20,000, you owe $5,000 in taxes. When you pay that payroll, those $5,000 would be reduced by any emergency sick or emergency family medical leave that you pay. That's sort of a big picture view of it, but that's technically how it works. If for some reason you don't have enough tax monies to get reimbursed in that payroll by using that code, if you will, that will reduce your obligation of Social Security taxes that you would pay, you can apply, use a Form 720 that will get sent to the IRS. They're now returning those fairly quickly. In the second quarter rather, and beginning of the third quarter, those were not getting rapid returned, which was the original guarantee. They are now getting turned around much quicker now that people are back to work at the IRS. Questions about tax credits, EFMLA? Anyone asleep yet?
Not asleep,
No.
Robin, but I do have a question.
Thank you.
The hybrid school situation, in some cases, it's the matter that the schools are in session 2 days for a certain group of kids and then everybody's out, and then 2 days. Is that person still not eligible?
So if everyone is out, school is closed that day. So it's a great question. So if the model is 2 days in, 3 days from home, or 2 days, there's a difference between 2 days in, 3 days from home, to 2 days in, everybody's out, 2 days home. If everyone is out on a day, then that person is eligible for emergency family medical leave. But it has to be no school, not just remote school. A little odd, but nonetheless, that's, and you can again choose intermittent family medical leave under that. So that did create a lot of chaos in the month of September for sure. All right, so what else is coming? You all know there was that $600. The additional unemployment dollars have been much of the contention around why we haven't seen any movement, that and the fact that the acts that have been produced, I don't know if any of you have the need to fall asleep quicker at night, but if you do, the updated HEROES Act is around 2,900 pages. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that if you need to fall asleep quicker. But this is one of the biggest issues, the issue of additional unemployment that's being fought around right now. There was an additional $300 weekly supplement that was given to anyone who was on unemployment that made more than $100 in the state of Connecticut. That was for 6 weeks only. Originally, the state just applied to do it for 3 weeks, then went to 5 weeks, now has done the final 6th week to just make things a little bit more crazy. But that's done. And that was from FEMA, actually. People are just starting to receive those $300 checks. If you have not seen them yet, you probably will. But again, we don't know what's happening next. And that 6-week period is now over. The next sort of bullet that came our way was the executive order on Social Security withholding. And I say bullet because there's still so much left unknown about this. But basically on August 8th, and then there was some clarification right after Labor Day, the president signed an order to allow employers to defer the Social Security portion of wages, taxable wages that would normally be paid from September 1 through December 31. So that's the 6.2%, if you will, of people's wages. 6.2% gets paid by the employee. It also gets paid by the employer. So the total would be around 13.4% of savings, if you will, for the employer. So they would basically withhold those monies and not pay them with their normal tax payment. This only applies to employees whose wages are less than $4,000 biweekly. Or equivalent to other pay frequencies, so $2,000 a week, $4,000 biweekly. The affected withholding is only on applicable wages, so it's $4,000 and less. And it's not a gift as it's been currently defined. It is a deferment. It's postponed. Those taxes would need to be paid between January 1 and April 30th of 2021. Interest and penalties would begin to accrue on May 1st of next year if that 13.4 or 12.4, I guess, not 13, 12.4% would get repaid. And the taxpayer, meaning the employer, would need to make arrangements to collect that money back from the employee. So that's where things get a little dicey. So you've got this 6.2% of your money as an employer, 6.2% of an employee's money, so that 12-ish% that you have, I'm sure the employer can accrue and put that money aside, but what do you do if an employee leaves? So if an employee leaves you on January 1st, who's paying that 6.2% that the employee was able to defer for these 4 months? Is the employer obligated to pay that? Based on the way this is currently written, I would suggest that they are. There were some questions around threshold. We did get an answer recently that the threshold 4,000 is for wages. So if an employee had $4,000 of wages and a supplemental check for a bonus, and they were 2 separate checks, you could still defer on the $4,000. If they were combined in 1 check, which put it over $4,000 for biweekly again, you couldn't use any of it for deferral. So we did get that piece of clarification. We're still awaiting clarification on what happens if an employee leaves, who owns that obligation. But we also did get clarity how it gets reported. On the 941, which is your quarterly tax return, there will be a line that will include both the employee and the employer deferrals. We've also gotten clarification that it is up to the employer to participate. It is not up to individual employees. Questions on that? Anybody trying or thinking about doing it?
Hi, Robin. We actually looked into it and we opted not to do it because we just didn't see where the benefit was to us.
Yeah, just being able to save and sort of carve that money out for a little bit of time with the current risk sitting on the other side is a little bit scary. So the feedback that I've gotten from employers is, well, what happens if they say this is forgiven? Then we put all that money in, that 6.2% of ours and the 6.2% of employees, and we lost that opportunity. File an amendment. Right? File amended taxes, give the money back. It's much easier to give it back and then keep it than it is to potentially take a hit. And it could cost a lot of money if those employees, especially if you're in a high turnover business, that could cost you a significant amount, certainly more than what your savings would be. So I would think long and hard about that, but know that you always do have a get out of jail free card with an amendment. So that's what's happened at a big picture federal level. Let's take a look at what's happened locally in our state. One, for those of you who had to do all of this training, which should be everybody on this call, for sexual harassment, for those of you who made sure you got all of your people trained by October 1st, November 1st, JK, you really didn't need to do that. That's been pushed, right, till January 1st. So if you didn't know that, it is. For those of you who filled out all your deferral forms, you didn't need to. But right now, the deadline is 1/1/2021. Certainly, we've been doing seminars pro bono. We have them every Wednesday if anyone needs to. Send anyone, feel free. It is alive. It's both live and video based to our program. But let me know if you want to send any of your managers or employees to those programs. Questions on that? That was all good news. Paid FMLA, maybe some good news, maybe some not some good news. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this candidly. So we've got 15 minutes left. I'm going to spend probably the majority of my time on this, but know that I can't do this complete justice in this time. I did share with Nancy, we're doing a program on Tuesday. You're more than welcome to join. Just let me know if you want a registration link, no cost, but we'll get into this in a lot more depth then. So just from a simple overview, paid FMLA leave for the state of Connecticut goes into effect for deferrals, meaning employee deferrals, January 1st. So for background, for those of you who may not remember, the paid family medical leave was signed into law June of 2019. I had the honor of serving on that committee probably starting in 15. We were on that for about 2 years to look at the process, determine if it was viable and whether or not the state should have it. I won't let you know where I sat on that issue, but I will tell you that it was obviously ultimately signed into law. It is administered by a authority. The woman right now who is the director of that authority, the CEO, Andrea Barton-Reeves, is a brilliant woman, an attorney, and she has been doing a lot of work in getting that authority prepared to identify specifically the pay portion of paid family medical leave. There's a lot of caveats to the next section of who this applies to, but know it's one employee or more. It applies to all private sectors. There are some exceptions for private secondary and elementary employees. There's also some exceptions to municipalities and bargaining units. There's an entire section just on who is carved out of this and who's carved in. So if you have any questions, if you're not a private sector employer, meaning your municipality, there's a specific code. Take a look at that to see if you fall into that code based on how you have been founded and funded. And the employees right now will be contributing 0.5% of total compensation, total gross wages. Total gross wages, we're looking at what's also known as Social Security wages, which are post any pre-tax deductions. So gross wages less 401k, gross wages less what you pay on medical, dental, pre-tax. So it's that secondary line which you use for Social Security contributions. The reason I say right now employee contribution is there is no guarantee employers won't be contributing to this fund in the future. In 2021, however, it is just employees. I should clarify too that employees will not be able to participate in these paid leaves in 2021. That begins in 2022. So the concept was to create a pool or fund of monies so that when the program goes live for payment, which is in 2022, employees will have some monies to be paid. So what's changing? What's new about this versus the existing Connecticut state family medical leave or federal family medical leave? One, it applies to most employers, right? Right now, there's these caps of 50 and 75 employees. Those are gone. This will allow employees to take, employees of employers of one or more, to take 12 weeks of paid leave over a 12-month period. So notice that that 24-month period that was existing in Connecticut's law has gone. In some cases, there will be 14 weeks of pay if there is a serious health condition that results in incapacity during a pregnancy. It definitely broadens who qualifies, as we've just discussed, and for what reasons under Connecticut's existing FMLA law, as well as the federal law. An employee will have to be employed by you for 3 months preceding the leave. So that's a good thing. That's different currently than what we have with either emergency sick or emergency family medical leave. And the employee will have had to make at least $2,325 in the first 4 quarters of the most recently completed 5 quarters. So you remember that unemployment looks at quarters to identify what someone is going to be paid. So this is similar to that. So it looks at the back 5 quarters of wages, and they will have had to, in the first 4 recently completed, have earned at least $35.25. So if you take 23, I think I just said that backwards, but $23.25 divided by 3 months, those dollars, so roughly $750 a month, the employee needs to earn to have been qualified by the authority for pay. The great news about all of this is that you will not have to get involved at all about what the employee is going to get paid, because I'm going to show you quickly the calculation. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it today, but the calculation is I won't say complex, but it's confusing. But it's not up to you if the employee has made enough money or what they're getting paid. None of that is on you. That is the purpose of the authority. The authority's role is to determine pay. They don't determine whether or not the leave should be qualified or not. That's up to you as the employer. But they are responsible for identifying pay and what the amount of pay is. So let's talk about what the leave is for. The leave is to take care of a worker for their own serious health condition, to serve as an organ or bone marrow donor. If the worker's needs are related to family or domestic violence, 12 days maximum can be used towards that. The birth of a child or placement or adoption of foster care for a child. What's most changed is the definition of who you are caring for. Right now, it's caring for a spouse, son, daughter, or parent with a serious health condition. This has been changed to the wording of to care for a family member of the employee if such family member has a serious health condition. And that's important because the family member definition has been broadened. We're going to look at that in a second. To care for family members who are in the armed service undergoing treatment that was incurred during the line of duty. And for certain circumstances, when family members are called to active duty or notified of an impending call to active duty, people are eligible. And again, I just want to make the note that it's up to 14 weeks, specifically if the incapacitation is due to pregnancy. So covered family members, as I shared, is probably the biggest lift. In-laws have changed. Child siblings are now included. Parent in-laws are included. The biggest, I think, wording that we'll have to manage carefully is the following: an individual related to the employee by blood or affinity, whose close association the employee shows to be equivalent of those family relationships. So I have an aunt that's very close to me, who raised me. That person I could take care of and would be considered a family member. I have a neighbor who has been a significant part of my life. I consider the affinity of that relationship to be such that they are family. I can now take a leave to take care of that person. Things are going to get a little dicey under that piece. There's going to be a lot more to come. I'm hoping there will be some further clarifications around that, but I think that will probably be the biggest area of contention with employers and employees. Obviously, spouse stays the same. New is grandparent and grandchild. So what does someone get paid? I'm sorry, you're listening to my old English sheepdog who's having a dream. What does somebody get paid under the family medical leave? Again, this is not your problem to define, but I'm going to give you a brief look. There's two parts to the calculation. One is on base wage earnings, and the other one is looking at the caps. So in January, or now actually, the minimum wage is $12. If an employee's base wage earnings is $1,000, you take 95% of their base wage earning. For my example, it's $950. Then you look at the minimum wage that's in effect. It's 40 times the minimum wage. Right now it's $12, which is $480, and you come up with the difference. So part one is taking $950, 95% of my base earnings, less the 40 times minimum wage to get a difference of $470. Part two, you take 60% of that difference. So 60% of 470 is $282. Sorry, we'll wake him up. And then you're going to take 95% of that base wage, or the cap if the income is capped, and we know that it is capped in this case. So you take the base cap of $480, so that's from up here because you're looking at this screen. And you take the overage of $282 to come up with a total of $762. Clear as mud so far, right? Now take that cap at 60 times the minimum wage, which is $720 under the new minimum wage. So you're taking 60 times 12 is $722. So this is the cap. The $720 is the cap that anyone can earn right now. In this case, the person has $762, so they're over the cap, so they're going to get the maximum. So it's $720. When this goes into effect for pay, the cap will be $780 in 2022. So why didn't I just tell you that it's $780 that they're going to get? Because not everybody's going to get $780, because it's only going to work on the base wage of $1,000 will they get capped out. Make sense? Anybody fall over? I know, Walter, you're shaking your head saying, oh my God, who could have actually come up with this, right? Who could have actually come up with this? I tell you to do the, as I shared, I'm doing this presentation on Tuesday. I probably did this calculation 100 times, 50 different ways, and I still kept looking at it saying, why did it have to be this complex? Why did it need to be this complex? So they made it so that employers can't explain it, but the good news is you don't have to. So don't try. Don't try. Don't try this at home. Any questions I can answer for you so far on that? Because I'm going to just give you a couple more things. And I know Nancy's saying, oh my God, we need to get to open questions. So paid FMLA, what's next? Just a quick note, 11-1, the paid leave authority, the authority opens for registration. You will need to register. And all third parties, people who are remitting taxes on your behalf, payroll companies, if you will, like us, we also have to register beginning 11-1. You will pick your third party if you have one. If you don't have one and you do your own taxes, you'll be identifying that as well. There are file formats that you'll have to remit those taxes with. They'll be remitted quarterly with your unemployment returns. You'll need to notify employees that the deductions are going to be beginning because they will be beginning in your first payroll in January. You want to review your PTO policies. We didn't talk about this at all, but employees, you cannot require an employee to use their PTO, period, which is a big shift. If an employee chooses to use their PTO, they have to leave a 2-week bank. So they have to leave a 2-week bank of time. You cannot leave them without a 2-week bank of time, period. Whether they want to or you want them to, they have to leave a 2-week bank of time. Review your insurance plans. You're going to have some questions in 2022 about, do I keep my short-term disability? Do I get rid of it? What's the best option at that point in time? Employees by statute will not be able to double dip. They won't be able to get more than 100% of their current comp. So know that yours would supplement, if you will. If you choose to keep it, many employers will probably dismantle short-term disability. There are some options to use a qualified short-term disability plan. Those have to be approved by the state. If you do, again, a lot more to come. I left 1 minute for the travel ban. I'm going to just tell you quickly, the biggest change on the travel ban is now you can accept a COVID negative test within 72 hours of an employee coming into the state, traveling back into the state. That test needs to be submitted. An employee doesn't get a test, doesn't want to get a test, and they can't work remotely, they would be eligible for emergency paid sick time. So I've left you with 1 minute and a lot of shared work stuff that you can talk about after you read the slides. What can I answer for you? I'm good for a few more minutes if you guys have questions. Nancy, I don't know what your time constraints are, but I'm certainly open to answering questions if you guys want to take your mics off and ask questions.
Everyone's so quiet. It's a lot of
Walter keeps shaking his head.
You know.
Anything I can answer for anyone.
Maybe we could talk a little about the shared work if no one seems to have any questions.
I'll spend 2 minutes on shared work. For those of you who don't know, the state, as many do, have a program where you can actually identify groups within your workforce that you don't have enough work for. And the burden is basically becomes your burden rather than the employee's burden to apply for unemployment. But the nice part is you can reduce somebody from 10 to 60% of their hours, so a minimum of 10%, maximum of 60%. And by doing that, you can report hours worked or reductions, if you will, of hours worked to the state on behalf of your workforce so that they don't have to go in weekly and certify and all of those things. All they need to do is go in once and certify and say, this is where I want my money to go. And then every week you can identify, Nancy is getting paid a 10% reduction this week. Paul's getting paid a 60% reduction this week. You do have to put a plan together of what you believe you're going to be doing for your shared work time. It does have to get approved by the state. The state has a huge backlog right now in their shared work applications, but they have said if you do the applications, notify employees that they're going to be participating in the shared work, you can begin doing it the Sunday after, because this program runs Sunday to Saturday. So irrespective of your current pay period of whatever it works, you need to go Sunday to Saturday. You can begin putting people on the reduced work hours, but you'll probably be waiting about 4 to 5 weeks for the sheets that you need to submit employee reductions, if you will. So that's a really broad overview, but it's a great program, and I'd be happy to spend some time with you guys.